We like to eat, we like to copulate, we like to have tribes, we like social status, we want shelter, we want comfort, right? Those are all of the things that we share with animals. Spirituality for me is anything that humans do that is beyond that. So anything seeking transcendence, the creation of art, coming together in community, altruism, service to others, seeking beauty, seeking solace, seeking meaning, pondering life's biggest possible questions. All of those are in the milieu, for me, of spirituality. So that can involve someone who's very strictly and fundamentally religious, and that can be someone who's spiritual but not religious, and that can be people that atheists and agnostics, who can often be the most spiritual people you meet, that are very involved in making the world a better place and seeking a kind of transcendent meaning along the way. So how do we combine that with selling shoes? No, how do we... So we're talking about these spiritual principles, and the one question I had is, how did some of the principles about what I just described conflict with capitalist policies and practices, and what spiritual principles might be aligned with capitalist practices? Any thoughts?
I think the secret is that they don't. I mean, ultimately, we're in the business of humanizing our product, whatever it is, whether it's those silly shoes or whether it's, something that you're selling as a hotel experience. And I think to the degree that you recognize that it's a human contact that really creates a good product or creates a market, to the degree that you figure that out, I think that you're starting to tap into that relationship between humans, which is all manifested through our spirit.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anyone else?
Julian, so you're saying they don't conflict, that spirituality and capitalism can be aligned or are aligned in their truest form? I just want to understand.
Yeah, I think they're absolutely aligned. I mean, in my business, I've got an easy product. I sell hospitality. Mm-hmm. It's an attribute. It's something that is easy to, as a Baha'i, service is one of the highest forms of behavior, and it's elevated to the level of worship if you're doing it in service to mankind. So I get paid to do that, and the trick is, to humanize it as much as possible, and it's all a big spiritual experience, and I don't see any conflict, and I say that kind of in a big, broad, way, but there's plenty of conflict in the hotel business.
But Julian, the great philosopher and linguist Noam Chomsky talks about the myth of the benevolent corporation, and oftentimes we talk about greenwashing, but you hear an ad for Subaru. They had that ad campaign, love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru. It's like, I really don't believe that the Subaru dealers and manufacturers are in it for love. I'm sorry, I just don't. I'm skeptical that love is part of that equation. But they know their audience, right? Which is NPR listeners with golden retrievers. So they know how to sell to that audience. And so I believe that, in fact, I was just reading a statistic that 2/3 of Gen Z do not trust, like, or believe in capitalism. So people under 25, 2/3 of them, think about it when next time you walk through a mall, 2/3 of them don't believe in capitalism. Actually, that's probably the third that is at the mall, so never mind, disregard that. So whenever you think about Gen Z that are not at a mall, they probably are not believing in capitalism. So what about this idea, like Innisfree hotels? Well, let's stay with you for a minute. Innisfree hotels, you guys are known for your corporate culture. Right. You've won many awards. You've been singled out on the national stage over and over again. You have all kinds of social initiatives, grassroots initiatives that you support in the communities that you serve. But has this bumped up against capitalism? And what about the cynicism that capitalism has created of like love actually not making a Subaru, but profit making a Subaru?
So I can tell you, the whole pricing strategy that hotels have adopted from airlines, where the rate changes by the hour, that's a bit of that's tough. When you check in and you're paying $150 and the next person's paying $350 for the same room, that's a problem. And it's, we get a lot of pushback from that. And the whole supply-demand relationship is not necessarily loved by everybody. They want to know that everybody's being treated the same. That's a problem, as an example, in my business.
So are you going to get rid of surge pricing, or is that part of your
No.
your economic model?
No, I mean, it's I was going to be really, really catty, but it is a supply and demand thing, right? I mean, if you create scarcity, the value and the price is going to go up almost universally, and I think that's a capitalistic, concept. No, I'm not going to change that. I got to make some money.
So I think that I think, Rainn, when I was trying to turn over this kind of dualism here in my mind, it's actually, I think the world we live in today it's actually very difficult to even isolate what capitalism is, because I think it's actually so deeply ingrained in our culture now that absolutely I agree with Julian that if capitalism is promoting principles like pursuit of excellence and honoring the customer and serving humanity, and if it is about kind of reward for effort, and the transparency of prices as a transparent signal of value, and all of the disclosure that comes with that. Certainly, I think it could be aligned with some values that, as Rainn, you mentioned, help us to transcend as human beings above the monkey-like state, right? Potentially. But it's actually hard to tell the difference, in my mind, between capitalism as a system of kind of organizing capital resources and just doing business, or markets. So markets are not actually exactly the same as capitalism. Capitalism as I understand it, is a particular form of how markets are organized. Yeah. And doing business in an ethical way with excellence and organizing markets perhaps that's all we need in order to reflect some of these transcendent principles. And maybe capitalism is a source that can accelerate that, but is a system that could accelerate, but is potentially also a system that could accelerate other values that we think are in conflict, such as extraction and injustice and transactional, like commodifying human relationships into a transactional nature. These types of things that I think when young people are saying they don't believe in capitalism, they're probably associating it with those outcomes. So what is capitalism, actually?
Should we ask ChatGPT?
Yes, let's ask ChatGPT.
Daryn knows, he knows. Go ahead.
Well, as a matter of fact, and Emily teed me up beautifully, because I was sharing with her that I did ask ChatGPT, capitalism is an economic system characterized by private ownership of the means of production, right? So you have all birds making orange sneakers, market-driven allocation of goods and services. You're talking about surge pricing for hotel rooms, and the role of profit, as you said, I got to make some money, as the main incentive for economic activity. And I think number 3 there is the key.
Yeah,
Daryn, what do you think? You live and breathe in this world and walk this tightrope between justice, fairness, equity, elimination of extremes of wealth and poverty, and kind of a just view of capitalism and using capitalist tools to empower and uplift communities. You've been in this business for a long time. What's your take?
I started on the other side of capitalism, on the regulatory side, and essentially passing laws that protect low-income homeowners from predatory loans, and developing a strategy to take on the biggest banks in the country in order to hold them accountable to the roughly $9.1 billion in excessive fees they were charging above risk to largely disproportionately Black and disproportionately Latino-headed households. And many of you may know that the largest, the highest way in which people reach the middle class in the country today is through home ownership. So to have an artificial tax on that because of fees and extraction is a really, really challenging thing for folks that want to send their kids to college one day or start a business one day, et cetera. And I was inspired to really study business partially because I thought there could be a better way than the way that I was seeing and trying to pass laws with a bunch of wonderful people to try to protect consumers and homeowners. And a lot of what we do today is we build and invest in firms that are profit-oriented, but have a really important dimension of impact as a shared objective and purpose. And they're looking at transformative healthcare solutions or environmental solutions that can scale, and also working on adding women and people of color to their businesses as a dimension of outperformance. So I don't think it's perfect, but in order to scale strategies to address a lot of these bigger societal problems, I think it's at least a strategy that over time can reach scale and impact change at large levels.
All right. Yassin, Starfish in the Gambia educates girls and empowers them. You use spiritual values and a spiritual toolkit to do that. But what does that kind of empowerment look like for educating the whole girl? And then, part two is moving them into the workplace so that they're part of the system of being able to, have skills and provide for families. And how do you walk that tightrope?
Well, I was thinking about this and spirituality and capitalism, and I was thinking about sitting on this panel, and I was thinking, if I just sat here and minded my business, I'd be good, but it's not working out like that. Because when I was thinking about it, I was like, all your isms are not going to work, but we have our own problems, so maybe I should leave the isms alone. But I was thinking about it in terms of spirituality. What I say to my children about whether, when they ask me whether God exists or not, I always say to them, it's not my place to prove to you that God exists. I'm not even sure I can do that. But what I can tell you is that in my quiet moments, in my desperate moments, in my lonely moments, sometimes even in moments where I'm just really looking in the mirror, I can tell as a human being that there's more to me than what I'm seeing or what I'm feeling in that moment, which then tells me that there's something that is a spirit beyond the form. Right? If that's the case, then that means whether you believe in God or not, there's a spirit, there's something beyond what you see in your own self. And if there's something beyond what you see in your own self, then that permeates everything that you touch. So if you touch capitalism, communism, any isms, if you touch a car, if you design a car, teach a class, sit beside somebody, there's more than just who is physically touching that. So capitalism cannot exist without spirituality, because the people perpetuating it cannot exist without spirit. So the question then becomes how much of it or how little of it. That's really what we're talking about. How much spirit do we put into it? How much spirit are we not putting into it that we should put into it? Luckily for me, I work with women and girls, so if you know women, you know we're just phenomenal and fabulous. Right? So the movie we watched yesterday said there are things we can do that men can't do. So I'm lucky to be working with that population. And when I look at them, if I do my work right, I just have to hold a mirror to them and say, this is what I see. You might be going through all these troubles, but I see how wonderful you are. I know that you can give birth and you can nurture a life in collaboration with God and your husband or your partner. And so when I talk to the girls, that's really what I want them to know. One, that they were born noble, that these values, these spiritual concepts are already in them. They're not things I'm putting in them. They're really things I'm just showing them. Like, you were born noble, that means nobody can really pay you your worth, right? But nobody can give you charity either, because you were just born a queen, period, right? God gave you that. So therefore, if you are a queen, then what does that mean? What responsibility does a queen have, a good queen, to their people? And so that should lead you to some form of spiritual work or spiritually infused work. But you have to do something for your people. And as you do it, you have to think about courtesy, because they're going to disagree with you, you're going to disagree with them. That's a spiritual quality. How do we disagree in these forums, in these systems, respectfully? And you can't just say, I'm a queen in ideas. You have to make some money. But how are you going to do that, and how is your knowledge going to inform that? So those are the nobility, independence, knowledge, courtesy, and service. These are the spiritual anchors of the girls. And then they have to look at that consistently to see what are their responsibilities towards the world, not what the world owes them, and how are they going to do it like queens.
Beautiful. Yeah. That's amazing. But continuing there, you're educating, let's say you're educating women and girls. Job training and vocational training is part of what you do as well, as these kind of spiritual principles. And if you're sending a young woman into the marketplace as a nurse or as a seamstress or going to school or whatever path that they follow, if they're going to be engaging in the whole economic system that is doesn't necessarily bring out the best of humanity, how do you prepare them for that work?
So I anchor them in their culture. Luckily, I come from a very old culture, an African culture. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that African cultures are copying from the West, even though we're an older culture in a lot of ways than these systems. There are things we're copying, so our young people are led that way or are going that way. But if we look at just what we were born and are growing up around, so for example, if you think about it in terms of food, we cannot, if you only have enough food, if I had, I don't know, a McDonald's Happy Meal just for myself, as per African culture, I cannot eat it on this panel unless I'm willing to share it with everybody on the panel. And if I don't have enough for everybody, then I need to eat it privately, but I cannot eat it around the people. So that always then puts you in a place to think about the other person. So as they go into the real world, one of those things is what I send them out with. Look at where you're anchored and where you were born. And a lot of the time, it has very little to do with how much money you individually have, as opposed to what relationships are you building so we can take care of each other. And that's really my hope for them as they go out, that they take these lessons that courses through their veins and share them. So another example is if there's a wedding, if your child is getting married in the village, everybody brings something that you send with your child and you do the party with. It doesn't matter how rich you are. You could foot the whole bill for the wedding, but the requirement is that everybody that is in town contribute something, and then they come the day before to help you set up the party, and then they come the day after to help you clean up. And what that does is then that every Gambian child, according to culture, when they get their first paycheck, they don't spend it. They have to take it home and they have to share it with everybody that helped them get to that point. So you never spend your first paycheck, which means even though you're making the money, you understand that very little of it is yours. So they already have these things. What they have to overcome are the obstacles that have been smothering these things that is their birthright, in essence.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. It really frames the whole conversation and grounds the whole conversation. Thank you so much. Emily, tell us a little bit about your work and about responsible investing and what it means to you and how does it work in you're involved in one of the largest funds out there. How does responsible investing, how do you feel about it? How does your company use it? And what's the future of it?
Oh, big questions. And I just want to honor, Yassin, what you mentioned, because I feel so uplifted hearing about the work that you're doing and the idea that, by uplifting the nobility of human beings, that we can bring out this coexistence. So at Calvert Research and Management, we are a boutique, specialist responsible investment firm within a larger asset management firm owned by Morgan Stanley. And Calvert has its roots back in the 1980s, around the apartheid era, when Calvert launched what we believe to be the first US mutual fund that divested on a values basis from companies listed in South Africa, because in protest of the apartheid movement, and also because the client base was seeking to express their values through the way their capital was invested. And Calvert has been one of the original firms that's really shaped the development of this space over the decades. Over the decades, this space has evolved primarily from values-oriented divestment-style investing, so essentially excluding companies that are abhorrent or not aligned with your values across all different types of business activities. And it's evolved from there towards where it is today, which is really the practice of responsible investing is the deep consideration of environmental, social, and governance factors and how they may affect companies, and using disclosures, which are more available than ever before, to better integrate those considerations into the practice of asset management. So that's essentially your best estimates around risk and reward, and building it into target valuations, and using that to essentially inform the way in which you develop a diversified portfolio. That's what's become mainstream, and that is what the practice of ESG is today. It's the consideration of financially material, environmental and social factors and how it affects companies you invest in. What's also emerged in parallel to that is what I think of as like the next wave of values-based investing, which is impact investing. The idea that investors want to allocate capital towards solutions, and they want to pick the best companies that are helping that are not only managing well their environmental and social risks, but which are kind of making that future state economy, that sustainable future that we're yearning for, making that happen faster, and doing it in a way which is profitable. And so at Calvert Research and Management, we run a family of funds that allows investors to allocate capital towards solutions that really, we're a mission-focused, mission-driven company. We believe have a high conviction in environmental and social factors as being really relevant to all companies' business models over the long term. We think it's our fiduciary duty to invest capital wisely so that it generates a return for our clients. I mean, that's absolute baseline. But we believe we can do so in a way that generates positive global change. And we do that through the way we select companies, put them in portfolios, manage the portfolios, but then also the way we continuously engage with those companies and have active conversations with them about how they can transition their business models to be more in line with a sustainable future.
All right. And Daryn, that goes to you and your work, impact investing. And basically my question for you is, I invested a lot of money in Illumin Capital. What are you doing? What are you doing with my investment? No, but seriously, what are you doing with my money? Because, seriously, what's my return been so far? No, but I want to talk about impact investing and from your point of view. How's that going? Are you making an impact? And if so, how? And how do you choose these areas to make a difference?
Sure, I love the question, all of the questions. So, because we also believe at Illumin Capital that impact investing is a really important area of growth, and many of the people that we talked about that are questioning lots of things that are young people today are also trying to find an aligned way to invest their capital. So that's one of the big reasons why we're trying to pioneer a way of thinking differently. One of the big challenges with impact investing, like all investing, is that it's not very diverse. In fact, black fund managers that are outperforming are shunned in many cases, and we have research to suggest that the higher they perform, the more bias they face. And very similarly, the fund managers of women-led funds. So if we look at the broad system and the 1.4% of $82 trillion in capital that is managed by women and people of color, one of the things that we have to ask is, why is this number not moving? The mission of Illumin Capital is to help move the needle in that process and to invest in transformative companies and address biases that prevent them from advancing women and people of color in the firms, on the boards of companies, or other aspects. What I would say is, right now, one of the big questions for impact investing is, are we creating a better form of investing that also excludes women and people of color? Because that's not the world we want, right? That's not the world you want, right?
It's not.
So in order to interrupt that bias, what we're doing is publishing research and investing in companies like edtech companies that are teaching kids standards in order to excel in school. But we know that right now, teachers over-expel, discipline, and suspend black kids at 4x the rate of their white counterparts for the exact same infraction. And we know that's not fair, but if we plug it into the mind of the teacher into machine learning algorithms and advance those really quickly, or AI platforms, we reinforce that very same bias as we scale education and try to make it more equitably through impact investments. So the idea is, yes, we need to accelerate and scale positive impact through education and healthcare. I talked about financial products and financial loans earlier. But we have to make sure that in scaling this, we create a more unified and connected world. We also believe that it'll lead to a more prosperous world as well. But that's what we're about at Illumin Capital, and why we wake up every day to work for our investors.
And is that... Well played. Well played.
Nice.
All right. Would you say that work is spiritual?
I would absolutely say that the work is spiritual. So part of the reason the work is so spiritual is that if you're a high-performing black or woman-led fund right now today, or if you're a white investor today, and you're trying to figure this thing out, and you read a paper, especially for the women and people of color-led fund managers, that says that the higher you perform, the more bias you face, like the paper that we published with Stanford University and 4 professors, you have what Dr. Eberhardt, who wrote this book called Bias, Stanford professor, would call the power of research to soothe. Because you've been internalizing the idea after you've been crushing it in terms of financial returns for multiple years, that you finally got to a place where you feel like you've delivered what people are expecting, and you're facing more pushback. And what that does is it diminishes the human character of a person, the dimensions of the human. It diminishes both the person evaluating as well as the person being evaluated. I don't believe that much of the bias in the markets is intentional. I believe that people want to try to do better on the asset allocation side, but they're interrupted by these biases, sometimes and many times unintentional, and they're missing the humanity of the people that they're evaluating, as well as the economic value that they bring to the marketplace.
Julian, you've walked this for 40, 50 years with industry?
70, 80, yeah.
Something like that. What are some takeaways? You have some entrepreneurs here. We had pitches of, company ideas. We have some CEOs here and some deep thinkers. But what are 3, 4, 5 takeaways that you learned from Innisfree Hotels on marrying a spiritual path with a profit path, a financial path that's does end up in profitability?
Well, a couple of things, and I think one is how you define profit. And typically, in the financial world or the stock world, it's all based on bottom line. But we've adopted 3 areas of profit that we measure our success by as people, planet, and prosperity. And we're developing ways of measuring that engagement and then looking at our connection with the community to take care of the planet. And so, to me, that's addressing this whole idea of, how to reconcile profit as a spiritual practice. It's really defining it in a way that you can allow yourself to make an impact, because it's not just about the money. I mean, as it turns out, the dirty little secret is that if you take care of the people and the planet, profit follows. I mean, that's been proven over the last 120 years I've been doing this. It's a formula for success. And I think, many of us have bought into this idea of, Wall Street and all this, stockholder value being the singular measurement of success, and it's not. And, I think too that, in this room, there are a lot more individual owners than there are companies that are out there, large corporations. And each of us are struggling with this, trying to figure out how to get to that bottom line that you've got enough, disposable income that you can go out and do good in the world. And the trick is flipping it, right? Flipping it so that you can go and do that good in the world, and then the profit follows. In our small community of about 500,000 people, the work that Innisfree has done in the community creates a tremendous amount of business. Our competitors are in awe that we're outperforming them so dramatically because people want to do business with people that do good in the community. And it's, there's a cost of that. It takes money to do that. But over the years, we've earned that reputation, and people want to spend money, like to your point, that create good in the world. So, we've created that reputation, and the profits have followed.
And those profits, you didn't make enough of them to be able to afford socks?
Well, if we want to go there, let's see what you got.
From a sock standpoint?
Yeah,
Look at those.
a little bit. Yeah, but I don't know if I would show them all.
We need to we need to wrap up in the next 5 or so minutes, but I thought this one question is really relevant, and we could end with talking about this, and we'll just popcorn whoever wants to go first. But speaking of 2/3 of Gen Z that don't like, trust, or believe in capitalism, can capitalism be redeemed, or does it need to be replaced? Big question, big thesis question. You could have a whole weekend just on that question. Any thoughts come to mind? And we have a lot of redeemers of capitalism here in the group, but do you think ultimately it will need to be replaced? If we are, as Yassin said, if we are, our reality is spiritual. Ultimately, does a system that asserts profit as the end result and the highest result, can those coexist? Reinvention or replacement?
No, you go first. Yeah.
I think that as we accept that the world is one country and mankind its citizens more and more, we are going to have to modify a lot of the concepts that we have held on to so tightly. And so I wouldn't say we should get rid of it, but I think that when other voices join the conversation that should have been there in the first place, we're going to see that we'll come up with something that looks different from where we started. And so, if I was talking to a young entrepreneur, what I would say to them is 2 things. One, because I'm African, I tell stories, so excuse me. But I would say in the Gambia, in a lot of farming African cultures, when you harvest your crops, even if everybody farmed rice and you farm rice, you have to give part of that rice to whoever had a farm of rice that did worse than you did, and then everybody you want to honor in the culture. So you're not getting rid of farming rice, even though you're all doing the same thing, capitalism or whatever it is. You're still looking at who is doing it worse or who needs addition, and then doing that. And so I'd say to a young capitalist entrepreneur, human being, I would say, what if I told you that you were born noble? And what if I told you that never mind even just giving, but sacrifice is impossible, because whatever you give or sacrifice, you get so much more that it doesn't even make sense to call it sacrifice. And what if I told you that from my standpoint and who I've grown up around, joy is not connected to material being at all. And so joy is a state of the heart that is completely separate. And that service is actually where happiness lies. And most importantly, that you're going to die and leave it all here. How would that inform the decisions that you will make in whatever system you happen to find yourself in? And I think if we understand that, then we don't hold on so tightly. We realize that it's so not about you, it's not even funny, right?
Anyone else? Redemption of capitalism or ultimate replacement?
So I've been grappling with this. I grapple with this a lot and trying to think it through, and I don't know the answer. I think we're too early on in where we are as developing towards this global vision that Yassin mentioned, that we're still experimenting and we're still trying to form our views on it. But I think it's helpful to reflect on where capitalism came from. Because I think if we understand the historical roots of it, we may be able to understand the challenge that we're facing. So I've been doing a bit of kind of reading about this, and there's an economic historian called Albert Hirschman who basically traces the philosophical roots of how money-making came to be seen to be an okay activity, like not a morally abhorrent activity. And it's essentially through the writings of various economic and political philosophers that framed a human being as essentially power-hungry and violent, and was liable to be possessed by violent passions, and these violent passions needed to be kept in check by the relatively innocuous activity of acquisition. So out of all of the vices of a human being, you could essentially use acquisition and money making to neutralize the rest. So that's kind of the roots of the idea of where money making came to be a neutral and acceptable activity among merchants in Europe, in the kind of Middle Ages. And then I referenced another writer last night, Jason Hickel, who's also traced that history through the development of capitalism through the Middle Ages. And essentially, his reading of it was that this acquisitive impulse came to be so dominant that it was the introduction of growth-oriented capitalism, which is what is ultimately not sustainable. So it's the idea that if you're going to take some money and you're going to invest it in some means of production, you're going to get more money at the end from what you invested. So it's essentially a harvesting of some type of resource, and you're converting it into that capital. Now it's the unbridled growth imperative that makes it damaging, and he notes in his book that there is no natural process in the world that mirrors. Human beings don't continue to grow infinitely until we die. Right. Plants, don't continue to kind of grow exponentially. Like there's a period of exponential growth and then there's a stabilization. So this process of exponential growth doesn't actually reflect the natural world. So if we can understand that we've got these kind of concepts of kind of acquisition is going to deaden your kind of worst aspects. We actually have other tools now as human beings to manage our more monkey-like tendencies, as you mentioned at the beginning. I don't think we necessarily need acquisition, kind of the acquisitive impulse to do that. Growth kind of orientation is another element. And what I've heard from all of the other panelists tonight is implicitly what I'm hearing is we can use capitalist-type business models, but it has to be paired with the understanding of the nobility of the human being. And it has to be rooted in another set of values. And I think that there isn't anything that is in the way capitalism is practiced today that puts into place kind of the checks and balances that any system needs. I think we rely heavily on regulation. So regulation stops monopolies and oligopolies from forming. But regulation is not a substitute for morality and ethics. So when we look at Adam Smith, right, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, and I don't claim to be an expert on this, but I understand that he gets a lot of flack for being one of the early economic philosophers who essentially introduced this concept that a self-interested individual, that it was a virtuous activity for a self-interested individual to make economic rational choices. But I think that part of Adam Smith that's been forgotten is that Adam Smith didn't envisage a world where there wasn't also this concept of service and the nobility of the human being. So I think if we can focus on developing some of these principles of values and ethics in our culture, that may be the check that we need to continue to experiment with capitalistic models.
Thank you. Guys, yeah.
What she said.
I'll give it a shot. I think that when I think about unbridled capitalism, I think about the period in the country of slavery, and so profit maximization has been tried, and recalling segregation and slavery. People lived on the same plantation, but they didn't have the same rights to a life and freedom. But they were very, very close together. So there's something profound about revamping capitalism to see humanity in the individuals, and I can't help but think about the people that prayed all night in a spiritual way because it was the only thing that they had in order that I could be here today and share the story of why I want to change capitalism to respect all of us and so that we can respect each other in a new and different way, which is, I think, what each of our different remarks have touched on. But the fact that our investors are invited to Montgomery, Alabama to go through the history of slavery, and again, we see this happening in waves. This isn't a one and done process. Reconstruction happened after slavery, then racial lynching terror pushed back the gains of Reconstruction. Over 6,000 lynchings in the period of 1880 to 1968, and more being discovered and found by the Equal Justice Initiative on a regular basis. Many of those lynchings were economically based. Successful entrepreneurs who were building companies, trying to see a better life for their children and their communities, that were attacked for that reason of trying to actualize something that would have been shared with all people of all colors if it were actualized. So, and then again, you know, as we look at George Floyd's murder and the gains and companies showing up to help with that money has largely dried up and reached only a fraction of the commitments that were necessary. So we have to think about ways to hold together, lock arms together, and march together in order to make sure that these opportunities to shift capitalism in positive ways don't revert back as they have in previous periods.
Thank you, Daryn. Thank you. All right. Let's, I just want to say, just like Julian started us off, what a remarkable opportunity to sit down and discuss the intersection of spiritual ideas and capitalist ideas. This isn't being done or hasn't been done anywhere in the world as far as I know. And thank you to One Planet and Payam and Andre and everyone for making this panel possible. And please give it up for these wonderful panelists. Have a good night.
Think of sharing what you know.